Who we have up next is Liam Cleere from UCD Dublin. Liam joined University College Dublin in 2005 and works as a senior manager in UCD Research and Innovation. He leads the Research, Analytics, and Impact team. This team helps to promote the research reputation of the university, inform research strategy and performance through advanced analytics, and embedding a culture of research impact in the university. He has over 14 years of experience in research information systems, strategic planning, and business intelligence. In addition, Liam has over 10 years management consulting and project management experience in Ireland and overseas. Prior to UCD, he worked at Deloitte, Accenture, Rolls-Royce, and Bentley Motor Cars. He graduated with first-class honors in both his primary degree in mechanical engineering and in his postgraduate Master's of Business Administration. Liam, thank you for being here today. Go ahead and take it away.
Thank you very much, Lauren, and good morning, everyone. Darrell Naylor, who I'm sure many of you know, asked me to come along today to share some of our experiences with integrating our grant system with Elements and also using the dimensions data. So what I'm going to go through today is a fairly quick presentation just to describe that journey and how we got to where we are. So I'm going to give a little bit of background. And University College Dublin, we implemented Symplectic Elements back in 2018, so we're relatively new to the system. Our grants portfolio, we have about 100 million in research income every year, and we get a wide variety of sources of that funding. We have a lot of national funders, but also international funders, business and philanthropic organizations. So we get about 600 new grants per year. To manage those grants, we developed our own in-house grants management system about 13 years ago. We call that system RMS Grants, Research Management System Grants. And the system provides the functionality to support the following business processes: so registering new grants, recording proposals, and also processing internal funding schemes. So we do a lot of internal funding schemes, and we use the system to manage that. So we're like an internal funding agency, if you like, for those schemes. We also provide research grant reporting for our principal investigators through the system, and also a repository of research grant documentation. And all of these functionality help us to be compliant then with funding agencies so that we can report back to the funding agencies on the progress of the grants, but also on their financial performance. So since we implemented Elements, we've been integrated with our in-house system, RMS Grants. And this is just a picture of what the user interface of RMS Grants looks like. And as you can see, it's nowhere near as nice as version 6 of Elements. So anyway, we'll be using it for another while at least daily. So just to give you an idea of what it looks like. So RMS Grants and Symplectic Elements. So the data from the RMS Grants system is fed every night into the Elements system. So it's automatically populating all the grants that each academic is the principal investigator. Now, last year, we supplemented a lot of our own grants data with data from the Digital Sciences Dimensions product, and we subscribe to the data API that gives us publications and grants data. So that allows us to, I suppose, capture a lot of additional grants that we mightn't have seen otherwise. It's also possible then for individual researchers to add grants manually. And in the graphic on the bottom half of the screen, you should be able to see that the numbers of grants largely come from our own institutional grant system, But as you can see too, that the Dimensions grants and Dimensions for universities also help to populate a fuller picture of the grants. And this is especially true for, say, if a new joiner or new academic joins the university. If they've had their grants captured in the sources that Dimensions looks at, you get all their grant data comes in, and that becomes part of their profile. Whereas, you know, we just capture in our grant system, we just capture grants that are registered at the university. So we don't register previous history for each academic staff. And also people enter in some manual records, and you can see there's over 1,000 of those. So that's the kind of the picture of the data side. What's very important though, when you implement any data source, is that you're not creating duplicates. And the functionality within Elements is very clever in that it treats the grant feeds very much like the publication feeds that I'm sure everybody is very familiar with. And when you have a grant that is essentially the same grant, it combines the different grant sources. So here you see an example of one of our grants in the university, and there are 3 data sources for it. So there's our institutional one with the little gray gear wheel, and then you can see the 2 versions of the grant, the information that comes in from Dimensions. Adding Dimensions was very useful for us as a data source because it provided that wider coverage, and we got to see records that were previously unobtainable. We also get grant abstracts and metadata, and those data are directly sourced from the funders. So it allows us to compare some of the data that we've captured ourselves through our own system with those from the funding agencies. It also enables the linking of the invested grants to the publications held in the institutions in our own system, basically. And we also, through the Dimensions data, you also get a feed of the Global Research Identifications Database or grid for the different publications. So that shows where a lot of our collaborators are located. The automated linking of grants to outputs is also extremely important for us. And the next slide shows that. And I saw earlier on in Kate's presentation when she showed us the screenshot of the home page of version 6, that there was link funding to your publications. So by implementing the Dimensions grants API, this happens automatically for certain grants. So what you can see here is an example from our own system in UCD. And there's a grant that we have called Insight, and it's a big data research center. But for that particular grant, we automatically get links to 162 publications that have arisen from that grant. And that really helps us to kind of report back to funding agencies and also understand the outputs that arise from particular grants. What's very important too is that this happens automatically, and there's a full history of those linking operations that happen for each publication as they come in. So you can see that most of the activity and most of the changes to this particular grant have been happening automatically over a period of time. So each time a new publication is detected that is linked to this grant, it becomes part of an integrated record. The final slide here shows the dashboard functionality within Elements. And what this dashboard shows is a combination of different data within Elements. And it shows that we have our funding agencies, but it also shows how many grants we've had from those funding agencies, the value of those grants, but also the volume of publications that have arisen from those grants collectively. We can also see that there's the average citation count for each of those publications. So this is a really good example, I think, of using the data within Elements to present a composite picture that links funding to outputs and then some, outcomes, if you like, so some citation data. And this really helps us a lot in describing our overall impact story. So we can look at different grants, we can look at outputs, we can look at citations, and then that helps us to describe what the overall impact of those grants have been, and we can report back to funding agencies on what those grants have produced. So that's pretty much a quick overview of the functionality that we've developed with Symplectic Elements and with the Elements team to help us to understand our grants in a little bit more detail. So thanks very much for your attention, and if there are any questions, I'd be happy to take them now.
Great. I've had a question come through. First, it says, thanks, really useful presentation. So a couple of questions here. So it says, what is the difference between Dimensions grants and Dimensions for universities?
What I would say is the Dimensions grants appears to have more records in it, and it also has the linkage between the publications and the grants. They're the differences that I can see straight away. When they're implemented in the system, it's all kind of happens in the background, to be honest. You have your data, it's all integrated, and it's very which source brings what.
Perhaps I could dive in here to help. So Dimensions for Universities was an early integration we did actually before the full-blown Dimensions was really truly out there in the world, and is a legacy integration that we will be retiring. The direct Dimensions interop is the newer one that uses the full rich data set that Dimensions has available and has far more of that linked data. And so going forward, the Dimensions for Universities one will just fade away. The records that are previously harvested will stay in systems like UCD systems so that you don't lose any of that data, but actually all of the data that's in there is now in the Dimensions proper integration plus more.
Thank you, Kate. Couldn't have answered it that well myself.
Great. Okay, another question. What identifiers is Elements using to match duplicate grants together? Funder ID? That might also be.
It uses the grant ID and I think the title of the grant itself. But I think maybe Kate would probably know the
yes. Happy to jump in. So we have a fuzzy match that uses a combination of the funder name, the grant ID, and if necessary, the scheme name as well. We don't fully rely on grant IDs because they are historically very inconsistently treated across different systems within the scholarly ecosystem. Some add in slashes and other formatting things, others strip them out, and so we have to treat them in a slightly fuzzy way. So we use those other bits of metadata as a kind of a link, a placeholder to make sure that we're as accurate as possible. We don't use titles because there's something that kind of like publications titles, but even more so, are most likely to get a bit wrong, and particularly if you've got researchers doing any manual entry, what they often think they called their grant when they submitted and what they actually called it can be vastly different.
Okay, thank you, Kate. Another question for you, Liam. How do you handle reporting by corresponding author and or identifying where the corresponding AU or first or last AU is at UCD? This is possible.
Yeah, this is a bit of a tricky one because each data source deals with corresponding author in a slightly different way. So sometimes we kind of struggle to do this, and sometimes we have to go back to maybe the source of the information, like Scopus or the Web of Science. So I think it's a very difficult thing to do, and I don't think we've cracked it.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Was it straightforward to integrate your in-house grant management system with Elements?
Yes, I believe it is, because really when we implemented Elements initially, the Symplectic team kind of gave us a template for the data that the system takes on board. I think it was an XML template, if I remember correctly. And we just had to develop that interface ourselves from our own grant system. So our previous kind of researcher profile system, or equivalent to Elements, basically already had been integrated with our grant system as well. So it was really just replacing one system with another, and the integration was quite similar in terms of how it was written. So it wasn't a huge task, but I think for testing, we probably spent a long time making sure we had the correct data coming through, and also that you know, we weren't sharing too much data either, that we picked the right fields and didn't kind of over kind of share information either. So it took some time, but in the grand scheme of things, I don't think it causes too many headaches.
Mm-hmm. One thing I would add is, as I just mentioned answering the question about matching algorithms, in order to kind of use it to source records from things like dimensions as well, you really don't need to bring in every single field in your grants management system. You can keep it really quite focused, first of all, to avoid any potentially sensitive data, because some of the data in your grants management system is going to be sensitive, and bringing it into Elements to link and send out to a public profile or whatever is not going to be the right use for it. But also just to minimize the effort for that feed. So, you know, you can really have a feed that brings in maybe 5 fields, and that's enough. And anything extra you add is gravy. Yeah, you can keep it quite simple and consolidated in terms of the number of fields.
And just to add to that, all grant records that are imported from our institutional system are automatically set to invisible for the public profile. So each academic has to actively make them visible before they appear on their profiles. So we've taken that measure as well to ensure that nothing automatically appears in public domain.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. This next question I think is more for Kate. Kate, are there any plans to is there any update to the plans to connect with ResearchFish?
Nothing concrete. I know Jonathan did have a bit of a chat with their team, but I believe, as far as I'm aware, they are still working towards creating an API that would support such an integration. And until such a time as there's something for us to connect to, it's quite challenging for us to do an integration. In terms of when we get to that space, I mean, the data is there in a structured way. Our API is there. The principles of such an integration shouldn't be complex, but obviously it comes down to data mappings and stability and so on. So the devil's always in the detail.
I can briefly comment on that. So we definitely met with ResearchFish. This was some time ago now, since prior to their acquisition. So they've probably been busy elsewhere. But the real challenge wasn't really the technical integration. It was the data mapping from one system to another. And a lot of the information that's inside ResearchFish, which basically institutions don't have, doesn't really lend itself for exchanging with other systems. So things like outcomes of research funding, number of students that went on to get appointments elsewhere. It's not easy to bring that in from an external system, because that type of data doesn't really have identifiers or persistent identifiers for us to confidently disambiguate. were that data to also have been entered inside Elements. So I think there's definitely a technical piece that ResearchFish would need to do, which is the creation of an API to support either the extract or ingest of data. But then the conversation quickly turns to, well, what data can actually be reasonably exchanged, which doesn't then create duplicates in either system. And that's where things sort of get a bit stuck. What we do have is the ability to export publications that have been linked to grants inside Elements, and that data I know has been used by UK clients in the past to upload linked publication data to grant IDs in ResearchFish. So there are ways of exchanging data, but when you go beyond linking publication IDs and grant IDs, it does get a lot more challenging to be exchanging that types of data. But yeah, if anyone has further questions on that or wants to follow up, then yeah, do let us know, because it's something that certainly both Symplectic and ResearchFish are interested in helping our user, our joint user bases, but it's actually quite tricky to get that data exchange from one system to another.
Thank you, Jonathan. Okay, I think probably one last question for Liam. Do you use the Discovery module to support grant applications in any way?
At the moment, not really, other than a lot of applications that we put in. When it comes to the CV section, they will have a link to their online CV, and their online CV is provided by the Discovery module. So that's about as far as it goes. Also, for certain grants, we like to try and profile a group of researchers. So, more and more we're using the data within Elements to kind of profile that group, and in some cases benchmark it against other groups to show that they really are experts in their field.
I've got one additional question, if that's all right, Liam.
Yep.
So in your presentation, you mentioned that researchers can manually add grants. You also have grant data coming from your internal systems. I wonder if you could comment on whether there was any discussion as to whether you wanted non-UCD affiliated grants inside your Element system, or whether there wasn't a discussion at all and it was a no-brainer, because I know that's something that other institutions sometimes sort of teeter on as to whether they want that extra data or not.
Yeah, I think for many years we just had our own institutional data as part of our public profiles. When Elements was implemented, initially we started out in that kind of mode as well. But due to kind of popular demand among our research community, they wanted to add in additional grants for their public profiles. Now, any of those additional grants that are added in by end users, we don't use those for reporting back to funding agencies or for any institutional reporting. Those data are purely to support an individual's profile. So, yeah, I mean, I suppose from an official reporting kind of perspective, we're still just using our own institutional grants data, but for the external profiles, people are free to add in the grants that they've had before coming to the institution. So that's the compromise that we've come to.
Great, that's really useful to hear. And because you've got that grant management system feed, which is distinct and different to manually added records, you can do that type of differentiate grants for internal reporting. So yeah, really useful to hear that. Thank you very much.
Great. Okay, thank you. I don't see any other questions coming through. Oh, maybe one more. Hold on. Well, I think more just a comment, which is I imagine that it could be quite useful to know who of your researchers hold grants from their time at other institutions to help, for example, peer review processes for grants you plan on applying for. So, thank you, Lauren, for that.
I think that's a really good use of the system, and it's one that we actually haven't done yet. But I hadn't thought of it, but I think it is a very good one. And what I would say though is we wouldn't rely on it entirely either, because even though we're getting some, people are adding in manually some grants that they've had at previous institutions, and also from Dimensions grants we get some additional grant information from previous institutions. It's not entirely comprehensive, so we wouldn't rely on it as a kind of a key decision-making reporting tool, if you like, but it would help us, I think, kind of gather information for things like peer reviews and for just kind of getting a feel for people's expertise in a certain area. So I think that's definitely something we'll be using more of in the future.
Great, thank you. Okay, thank you so much, Liam, for your time. We're gonna